Good afternoon, friends. Today we've got something a little different. Today we're going to work on a barn find. So we've all seen the ad. You've looked on Marketplace, you've looked on Craigslist, you've seen them on eBay, you've probably seen them everywhere, honestly. Barn find, Harley Davidson. Well, sometimes those are actually legit. Sometimes they do come out of a barn. And this old 1975 here, it came out of a shed that looked like a barn that was falling over and sinking into the ground, so I think that kind of qualifies. But if you get yourself one of these, you're left thinking, man, what do I do with this thing? So let's talk about it today. Let's walk around the bike real quick, take a look at it all, and see what we have. Starting at the front, you can see this bike has some Morris mags on it. It is a 41 millimeter wide glide that's converted to a choppery style headlight. You can see that the bike has 1970 Harley Davidson tanks. They are legit 70 tanks. It has an S&S Super B. It is running points. It's a kicker style. It would have had electric start, but as you can see, all of that's missing. It's running a rear mag, a GMA rear brake, some goofy tail light. It looks like a barn find. It looks like it's been sitting for a little while. So let's take a minute and talk a little bit about buying a barn find motorcycle. Obviously, you've seen the ad, you've contacted the seller, you've made arrangements to go take a look at the bike. You get there, you start looking the bike over. Obviously, this thing is not real pretty, but if you can look through the rust and the dirt and the mouse turds and all of the things, you can see some good bits on this motorcycle here. Now, the seller doesn't know anything about it. It's been in their barn forever. It's an inheritance. It's left on a property. It's going to the scrapyard. That's where this thing was headed, actually. This is part of a property clean out, and it was actually heading to a scrapyard. So, unfortunately, this thing was going to be gone, and thankfully, I was able to pick it up, to get it. But this is not your situation. Your situation is you're looking at this thing in the barn and you're trying to make a decision on if this is a good buy. So looking over the bike, you're looking at some things and you notice that the points cover is missing. And you can see that this has gotten some water in it. Well, that could harm the electronics if it does have water damage and it won't run. But a couple of key things to think about. These 1970 and up motorcycles had a VIN on the neck and a VIN on the engine, and I'll show you those now. If you look right here, you can see there's a stamped VIN pad here, and if you look right here, the VIN number is also stamped there. And on this bike, it actually has this tag here, and sometimes they do have a VIN number on those as well, and I'm not sure if that's your specific. I haven't quite figured that out yet. The seller states this bike does not come with a title. Now what do? Do you pay them the cash, load this bike up, and hope for the best? You can do that. That is an option. I don't do that. I wouldn't recommend it. One of the things that I do is I use a website online. It's the nicb.org VIN Check. And you can actually run these 9-digit VINs all the way back, and it will tell you if it's either been stolen or if it was part of an insurance claim. And if this thing doesn't come back as stolen or a part of an insurance claim, and you can actually screenshot that showing the VIN number, the date you ran it, that'll show you that when you purchased the bike, everything was clear, just in case you happen to get into some sticky situation later on. That's what I always do. I always run the VINs on these things just to make sure that everything's okay. Now, one of the things that you can do after you've purchased the bike to obtain a title is you can take that VIN number and you can get a hold of Saint's Title Service. I'll put the link in the description below for both of the VIN Check and the title service. That title service will get you a title for this motorcycle, as long as everything comes back clear, just like you've seen it. Now that you've brokered the deal, you've got the bike home, and you're looking it over, and you're thinking, what do I do next? How do I know if this thing will run? Well, a couple of things to look at. Obviously, this bike did not come with a battery. I had to put one in it to get it anywhere. So what I did is I put a battery in it just to see if the electronics worked. Thankfully, they did. If I turn the ignition switch all the way on, you can see that the headlight does illuminate. It's a little loose in the wiring. The tail light does illuminate as well, and the brake light, you can probably see on the wall, is actually working. So the electronics are there. Now that the electronics work and you know that the wiring is actually intact and the battery will bring power to the headlight and tail light, will it bring power everywhere else? Now, with this bike, it had a run-stop switch and a start button along with an electric starter. Unfortunately, the switch housing is gone, so you have no way to see if the button will work. One of the things you'll have to do is you'll have to connect some of the wires. And this has already been done on this bike, and I'm kind of thankful for that. On the research that I've done online, the run-stop switch is actually the blue, and it looks like yellow, but I think they say it's tan online, if I remember right. I'd have to look that up again. But those are already connected, so these will work just like this because this does complete that circuit. So this will allow the spark plugs to spark based on the timing system here. Next up, what you'll want to do is you'll want to check the points here. And these points were kind of corroded, so you'll want to clean those. So what you'll actually do is you'll run a piece of sandpaper between the points, and I'll show you that now. So in here, you'll see the points and condenser system here, and this is where the points make contact. And what you'll do is, I'm doing this one-handed, so I'm not doing this the best way ever, but you'll actually separate the points here. My other hand for a minute, but you'll separate the points, you'll sand both of them, and again, this is easier to do with two hands. But with both the point surfaces cleaned, these should work as long as the condenser works. Now that the points have been cleaned, we want to check for spark to make sure this thing is actually sparking like it should. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the front spark plug and I'm going to loop it around here to where I can see it when I kick this thing. Now with the spark plug removed, we'll go ahead and turn the ignition on to the ignition position. We'll ground the spark plug against the cylinder head here. We'll move the camera a little bit so I can actually kick this thing, and hopefully you can see the spark. You can see it sparking there. Hopefully that shows up in the camera well. One of the things I forgot to mention is the gas tanks are actually really dry. They're very empty. There's a little residual fuel in the bottom. It doesn't smell terrible, so I don't know how long the gas has been in there, and maybe it's ethanol free. Sometimes when people are running ethanol free gas, it doesn't start to gel and turn into, I don't even know, meth. I think that's what everybody's calling it now because it gets kind of crystally and disgusting. It doesn't turn into that, thankfully. So these tanks do have a very little amount of fuel in the bottom, but they were very empty. So I'm working with some fairly clean tanks without a bunch of garbage fuel inside. I did also check the oil before I started kicking this bike over. That's one of the things I did forget to mention. So you can pull the oil dipstick on this side, on the left side of the bike here, or you can unscrew the oil cap here and look inside the oil bag. Now, one of the things about these higher oil tanks, so these Shovelhead, Panhead, and older oil tanks, they will essentially, the oil will all drain into the bottom end of the engine, which could make it hard to kick too, depending on how this thing was stored. So sometimes you'll be kicking through all the oil. This does have oil in the tank in the bottom. I suspect there's a ton of oil in the bottom of this thing, and if I do get it to fire, it's going to puke a ton of oil. Being that we're running an S&S Super B carburetor and there's no throttle on this thing, I will have to work the throttle by hand here. I am going to go ahead and turn the enricher knob up. I'm not sure if they call these a choker or an enricher, so it's a T-handle job. I'll spin that up. I'll actually open the valve body or the carb body here, and I'll spray some ether in there. I do like using actual starting fluid, so I'll spray some into the carburetor here in a moment, and then we'll kick this thing over and see if we can get it some life. I may put a little fuel in this thing after the fact to see if we can make this thing run. But let's get the garage door open. Let's go through the process of kicking this thing and see what we can get. Now with the garage door open, I'm going to go ahead and open up this carb body here so I can get some spray right down inside of it. And then we will flick the ignition back on. We're technically supposed to do a couple primer kicks. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to see what we can get just this. Now, one of the things you can do on these old bikes is you can actually bypass the Kickstarter and the start button with the solenoid here by jumpering it. This, unfortunately, the jack shaft inside here is stuck, and I'm assuming it's probably because there's a ton of oil on the bottom of this thing, so it's not actually actuating the way it should. But we'll show you how to do that. So flip the ignition on. We'll jump her across the top and bottom posts here, and you'll see it spark. And you'll hear it turn, but obviously it doesn't engage at all. So that lets me know that there's no way for the starter to actually work. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to keep kicking this thing. Being that this motorcycle has sat dry for a long time inside of a shed, and the carburetor is super dry, and there's no fuel in the tanks, and I'm not sure that the carburetor is actually working properly because I did put a little fuel in the tanks, and I have actuated the carb a couple times, and I've tapped on the float bowl to see if the float's gonna work. Unfortunately, what I would have to do is pull the carburetor at this point, rebuild the whole thing, but we're not trying to mess with that today. That's not as far as we're trying to go right now. We're just trying to see this thing run for a minute. So let's go ahead, open this car body back up again, spray it with some more ether, kick it a few more times. Good afternoon, friends. Another new day in the shop and another day working on the scrap Shovelhead. Now, the other day I left this thing kind of disappointed that I couldn't get it running. I was kind of lost on what I was going to do next and what was actually wrong with this thing. And of course, I needed some time to do some research and of course look at a ton of parts and figure out why. Why wouldn't this thing start? It had great compression. I was getting fuel finally. The carburetor was actually working like it should be for the most part. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's working like better than it was. Not stuck. The float's not stuck. But today, yesterday, the day before that, and the last few days, I've done a ton on this bike to get it to start, and I started it for the first time today. But before we go to starting the bike, I want to run you through what I did. A couple of things that needed to be replaced on this bike. The coil that was on this has a giant split on the bottom. And when I ohmed this thing out, it wasn't actually working properly because it was broken wide open. So that was a problem. I replaced that and thought, I'm in the home stretch. This thing will start. Next, I retimed everything. I went through the whole system, retimed all the points, got everything set up, or so I thought. What I didn't realize is in this bike is a set of S&S flywheels. Now, S&S flywheels have a bunch of markings on them, and they're different from regular stock Shovelhead flywheels. I've never timed anything with a set of S&S wheels on it. And what I found out is they have a mark that says TF and 2 dots. That's for timing front. They have another mark that says R and has a dot, and another mark that has F and a dot. I was trying to time this thing based on F and the dot, assuming this meant front cylinder, and that was the timing mark I needed to be using. After reading some forums and looking into this thing and actually rotating the flywheel assembly all the way around, I finally found the TF slot to show that this thing was out of time. So after timing it again for like the third time, I got everything set, or so I thought. And I kicked this thing and I kicked this thing and I kicked this thing and it still wouldn't start. I'd get it to kind of pop a little bit out of one cylinder. And I wasn't sure exactly what was going on, thinking possibly something had crawled up in there, died, maybe it was stuck, maybe a valve was stuck, maybe it's not getting fuel, maybe the intake's got a huge leak. I didn't know for sure. But one of the things I had kind of thought about was, well, I didn't take the timing plate out, so maybe the auto advance in there isn't right. And let me grab that and show it to you. So this is the auto advance unit. It looks like someone has spray painted it silver or something. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be that way or not. But it doesn't move. It's stuck in place, and I can't actually pull the cam out here. I know it's got a different name, but I can't think of it right now. But I can't get that to pull out at all or move, and nothing moves here. So this is not working properly. It wasn't going to work. Now once I pulled this out, put the timer plate back in, adjusted the points, and reset everything, put some fuel to this thing, kicked it a couple times, and she fired right up. Now it doesn't run great, but it does run. Now I know the carburetor's still a little gummy, and I probably could adjust the timing just a little bit, and I could clean the carb out a ton, clean everything out honestly, and this thing will probably run like a champ. But anyway, I did get it to finally start. I'm super pumped about it, and I want to show you guys that. Before I do that though, I have to remember that I did change the spark plugs and the spark plug wires. I did notice that the front cylinder spark plug wire was heavily corroded on the inside. The rear plug wire wasn't in the best shape, so I did put new wires on along with new plugs in. So I've got good clean plugs, I've got new wires, a bunch of new parts on this thing to make it, start. So let's get the camera reset up, get the garage door open, and start this thing. All right, I've got my door open. Now I can get the exhaust fumes out of this place and it won't smoke the place out and it won't stink real bad, which is awesome. Hopefully this thing doesn't fail me at this point. We're going to give it a shot. So we're going to turn on the fuel here. And turn on the ignitions because I just ran it, so I think I don't have to do any prime kicks right now. We'll find out real fast, but we'll turn on the ignition and we'll give her a couple little kicks here and see if she'll fire. Now I know it's not perfect and it doesn't sound the best, and of course these shorty pipes they crack a lot and they're kind of gross, and I'm not sure that they're the best on these types of bikes. Now I know people like them because they're really loud, but they do not give you any kind of back pressure. Now I know I can adjust the carburetor to run however with them. That's neither here nor there at this point. The next steps on this bike, I'm not sure. I just wanted to hear this engine run, and of course because it had oil in the bottom of the cases, it's now sumping and pumping oil all over the floor. So I do have my mats down and it is capturing all of the oil, but it starts easily, super easily. I know the carburetor could use a better adjustment so it runs a little better, but I did take it off the enrichener and it did run, which was super cool. It wasn't perfect, and you could probably hear that in the video. Hopefully it wasn't running the best that it could be. Now I haven't gone through and readjusted the push rods or anything like that. I did check them and they seem to be good based on the motor rotation and whatnot. But now that it's run, I've heat cycled it a little bit. Eventually I'll have to adjust those again to see if they are good. They probably aren't. There's a lot of things I'm looking at on this bike that are kind of weird. I do see that the bottom of the oil pump, one of the bolts is backed out, so that's an issue there. Obviously there's no timer cover on this thing. It's a project, but all in all, some of the ways to get one of these things running, just some of the things I ran into, I kind of wanted to bring you guys through. So if you're out and about, you find one of these things on Marketplace, at an estate sale, yard sale, in an old abandoned barn, somebody's selling it as scrap, it may be worth picking up. And we'll run through the process of title work and all that good stuff in a future video. I've got a couple things I'm working on right now that I'm trying to figure out all the ins and outs of. So I don't want to give any misinformation, and I'm not ready to produce that yet. But I've got a couple things in the work, and hopefully I'll have more answers this Friday, and I can produce a video on that. Well, friends, I appreciate you guys sticking around and watching the whole video here. I know that you probably saw me kicking for a little while, and it was kicking my butt, and it is a little disheartening when it doesn't work all the way, but there was a lot of things that I didn't have right, and there was a lot of things that I had to go through and figure out to correct. Everything wasn't perfect on this bike. It's been sitting for a long time. It was obviously missing a lot, and there was damaged parts and things that needed to be swapped and fixed and cleaned and all that stuff. But now that I have those things done, I would bet I could kick this thing again and it'd start right back up. Anyway, that's it for me. That's the end of the video. It was really cool to get this thing running and hear it run for the first time. I don't know how long this thing has sat. Obviously, it was in a barn for a long time. You can see it's kind of gross, and it probably has been neglected for a long time. I know that I found a couple of issues going on with it with wiring. The rear brake line has been fixed with electrical tape and does leak. It doesn't have any front brakes. It's missing the start button. Anyway, none of that matters. I'm not sure what I'm doing just yet, but I wanted to bring you guys to this point. And thank you for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit that like button. Let me know you liked it. If you have comments, questions, any of that good stuff, drop a comment below. I would really appreciate it. Thankfully on this one, I didn't have to buy any parts for it. These were all things that I have because I have a ton of parts. So I had a new coil, I had, gently used plug wires, I had brand new plugs in the box for one of these. I've got a bunch of plugs actually. So I have things I can use. So I did use those on this. It didn't cost me any extra to get this thing going. So yeah, that's all I really have for this video. I'm very grateful that this thing runs, and it was a lot of fun getting it to run. So I wanted to share that experience with you all. Stay tuned till the next time. We'll catch you then.